The echo of polished shoes against marble filled the grand lobby of the Pacifica Tech Forum in downtown San Jose. High ceilings, clean light, controlled chatter. Julian Vance didn't usually attend these conferences in person anymore, but this one had too much strategic value to skip. He stood tall at the top of the main staircase, tailored in charcoal, grey, notepad in hand, phone vibrating endlessly in his pocket. His expression, as always, was unreadable. To most people in the room, he was just the elusive genius of Vance Systems, disconnected but iconic. But someone, shifted the axis of his world that morning. Across the open hall, just past the rows of branded kiosks and name-tagged executives, he saw a woman guiding 3 little boys. She bent slightly to whisper something to one of them, her hand gently adjusting his tiny collar. Julian's breath stopped. There were thousands of attendees at the forum. Investors, founders, engineers, speakers. It should have been impossible to pick out one face, but it wasn't, because the woman was Alara. And the boys, they looked exactly like him. Julian's eyes locked on them. Frozen. He didn't move. He didn't blink. His pulse thundered in his ears as memory, shame, and disbelief tangled all at once. The last time he saw Alara, she was walking away with everything he didn't know how to hold: trust, comfort, love. And now, she was here, and beside her walked 3 small reflections of himself. Each child wore a navy blue polo. Their curls bounced with every step. Their little backpacks looked too big on their shoulders, and all 3 had those same unmistakable grey eyes. His eyes. Julian couldn't speak. The conference noise faded into a hum behind his heartbeat. Alara turned. Their eyes met. Julian hadn't seen her in 5 years, but she hadn't changed much. Strong, poised, unshaken. But her gaze wasn't soft. It wasn't angry either. It was something worse, something final. Julian took 1 step down the stairs, then another, and another. He barely noticed the assistant trying to get his attention, the camera flashes from tech, reporters capturing his sudden shift in direction, or the way onlookers paused to whisper. The CEO of Vance Systems was moving, but not toward a mic, not toward a pitch, not toward a deal. He was moving toward her. One of the boys noticed. He tugged at Alara's hand and pointed innocently. "Mummy, that man keeps looking at us." Alara turned away from Julian, her hand gently resting on her son's shoulder. But it was too late. Julian was right in front of her, and for the first time in years, he had no script, no plan, no armor. His voice broke as he tried to find footing in the moment. "Alara." She didn't respond. He glanced at the boys again, studying their features, their posture, their expressions. Everything inside him screamed with recognition. "Are they mine?" The silence stretched between them like a verdict. Alara didn't nod. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her quiet, steady gaze said everything. Julian's entire world tilted under the weight of truth. And just like that, the man who built a billion-dollar tech empire was face to face with the family he never knew he had. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that it scared you? Not the kind of fear that makes you run, but the kind that makes you quiet, the kind that pulls at your spirit until you question if your heart can carry what it's feeling. Alara had known that kind of love. It didn't come with roses or declarations. It came in the silence between conversations, in the way Julian Vance looked at her when no one else did, in the quiet ways he softened when she was near. He was a man built from logic and control. She was a woman raised on faith and grit. They had no business falling in love. But they did, and when he touched her hand on that balcony, when he said she reminded him how to feel again, Alara knew. It was already too late. She had fallen for him. Not the CEO, not the empire builder, but the man behind the quiet, the man who looked lost until she came into his life and made him feel seen. And she loved him more than she had ever thought possible. But Julian didn't know how to hold it. Not back then. When fear clawed at him, he didn't fight it. He gave in. He accused her, shut her out, pushed her away like she was one more variable he couldn't control. That day, when he told her it was over, he didn't just end a relationship. He broke the very thing he'd once said made him feel human again. Ilara didn't cry. Not in front of him. She left that mansion holding her dignity and the shattered pieces of a love she never got to speak aloud. 2 weeks later, she learned she was carrying not one, but 3 sons. 3 lives that had his eyes, his quiet strength, and the same calm stare that used to disarm her. But she didn't go back. She didn't call him. She didn't send a letter. She didn't reach for the man who had once reached so gently for her. Because she knew, sometimes loving someone deeply means letting go before they can do more damage. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't staying. It's walking away before love becomes harm. So she built her life from scratch. She raised those boys with the kind of love she once gave Julian. Patient, intentional, warm. And every time one of them asked about their father, she told the truth the only way she knew how. Not all love is meant to stay. But some love gives us gifts that last forever. The part of the story they didn't know was that she had once saved him. Julian Vance, the tech world's quietest storm, the CEO who built a billion-dollar empire, from algorithms and sleepless nights, owed his life to a woman the world never saw coming. She wasn't on his board. She wasn't an executive. She was the maid. Ilara had no degree in business, no network of influence. Just instincts, integrity, and a quiet strength that moved without noise. The night it happened, she was the last person in the house. The other staff had clocked out. Julian had stayed late in his private study, as he often did, alone, buried in codes and security projections. Ilara was cleaning the guest hallway when she heard the faintest sound of glass breaking. A pause, then silence. She turned, her chest tightening. Something was wrong. The door to Julian's private study, normally locked, was open. Inside, she found him on the floor, unconscious, blood running down the side of his face. The safe nearby had been tampered with. Papers scattered. It wasn't just a break-in. It was personal. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She dropped to her knees, pressed a towel to his head, and called emergency services. Her voice calm, her hands steady. Her only focus was keeping him alive. He opened his eyes once during the ambulance ride. The last thing he saw before blacking out was her, his maid, her hands covered in blood, whispering, "Stay with me." In the hospital, she stayed by his side. She read him company updates, brought him soup, sat in silence when he didn't want to talk. And somehow, without forcing anything, Ilara became the one presence Julian didn't want to be without. She didn't ask for credit. She didn't seek favor. She just showed up, with compassion, with strength, and slowly Julian began to open up. He told her things no one else knew, about his parents, about the pressure, about how he didn't know how to trust people, even the ones who meant well. They connected, in a way neither expected, and then, just when it felt real, he shattered it. Because when the investigation revealed the break-in was an inside job, Julian didn't trust what he knew in his heart. He leaned on fear, and turned on her. "You knew something, didn't you?" He'd said one morning, voice flat, eyes cold. "No," she whispered. He didn't listen. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pause long enough to hear the pain in her silence. He just accused, dismissed, shut her out like a bug in the code. "Ilara, whatever this was, it ends now." She didn't beg. She didn't explain. She left quietly, with her heart in pieces and no way to return. Now, years later, she was back, not with anger, not with revenge, but with 3 little boys who carried the very face of the man who had once asked her to disappear. And the moment Julian saw them, the part of him he'd buried, the part that remembered the warmth of her laugh, the safety in her presence, rose back to the surface with a vengeance. She had saved him once, and now she had returned, not as a servant, not as a victim, but as the mother of his sons. What happens when the man who built an empire stares into the eyes of 3 small boys and sees himself, Julian Vance had spent his entire adult life engineering systems to prevent failure, predict outcomes, control every variable. But what system prepares a man to meet his children in a hotel lobby, without ever knowing they existed? What algorithm solves that? As Elara stood before him, holding the hands of 3 mirror image boys, Julian felt the weight of years collapse into one blinding moment of truth. No press conference, no data set, no artificial intelligence model. Just real life. The kind he never thought he'd get to live. She hadn't confirmed anything. She hadn't said the words. But she didn't need to. The silence between them held more truth than a DNA test ever could. Julian knelt slowly, something no one had ever seen him do in public, and looked at the boys up close. Close enough to see the small scar on Rowan's brow, the one Julian had in the exact same place from a childhood bike fall. Close enough to hear Avery humming softly, a habit Julian had since he was a kid trying to focus. Close enough to see Finley's smile. Soft, lopsided, and unmistakably familiar. These boys weren't just hers. They were his. Not legally, not publicly, not yet. But in every way that mattered, they were his sons. The kind of legacy he never thought he'd deserve. And Elara, she had carried it alone. All these years, not for punishment, not to hide, but because she was strong enough to live without resentment, strong enough to raise 3 boys in love and truth, even if their father never knew. Julian swallowed hard. Elara, are they? Her hand rested gently on Rowan's shoulder. She didn't look away. These are my sons, she said quietly. Rowan, Avery, Finley. Julian's voice cracked, barely audible. They're mine. A beat passed. Her lips didn't move, but her silence answered everything. So now the question isn't just about the past. It's about what comes next. What happens when the woman who saved a man's life returns with the family he never knew he had? What does redemption look like for a man who once destroyed the very thing that could have healed him? And will love, even one broken, buried, and nearly lost, find a way to rebuild? Because the boys are here now, and so is she. And this time, she's not cleaning his mansion. She's holding his legacy. And whether Julian is ready or not, he's already part of a story that began the moment Elara walked away, pregnant with 3 kings. If you believe love deserves a second chance, like this video and comment, "Love always finds a way." Elara Monroe's childhood didn't come wrapped in glitter or comfort, but it was rich in something far more lasting: values. She was born and raised in a South Dallas neighborhood where porch conversations stretched, until streetlights buzzed on and Sunday mornings echoed with church choir harmonies. It wasn't a perfect place, but it was sacred in its own way. In her block, people leaned on each other like family, whether related or not. Struggles were shared, wins were celebrated, and even the smallest kindnesses mattered. Her mother, Bernice Monroe, was a nurse at a local health clinic, a woman who stitched together life with calloused hands and unwavering grace. There were no days off, no luxury cars, no lavish holidays, but there was discipline. There was warmth. And there was faith that tomorrow would be worth showing up for. Every evening after work, Bernice would wash up, sit on their cracked vinyl couch, and say the same thing. "We may not have a lot, baby girl, but we are never poor in character." Elara believed her. She'd seen her mother give away her only umbrella during a storm, cook double on Sundays so Miss Gertrude next door wouldn't go hungry, and refuse every shortcut that could have cost her dignity. The foundation laid in Elara was made of things not taught in books: loyalty, self-respect, humility, and the kind of strength that didn't have to be loud to be powerful. She spent most of her early life surrounded by familiar faces. Mr. Palmer from the corner barber shop gave out lectures with each haircut. The deacons at church treated her like their own. Auntie Nina, who wasn't really her aunt, braided her hair every Saturday while telling stories of when she first came to Texas. Everyone played a role. And Elara, she soaked it all in. She was never the loudest in the room, but she listened deeply, observed quietly, loved purely. By the time she turned 16, neighbors started saying things like, "That girl got an old soul. She gone make something of herself one day. They weren't wrong, but fate had its own plans. Elara was in her first year of community college when Bernice began to slow down. At first it was small things, dizziness when getting up, forgetting her keys, taking longer to recover from colds. But Elara knew her mother too well to brush it off. She booked the doctor's appointment herself. The diagnosis came on a rainy Thursday. Lupus, a chronic illness, manageable but unpredictable. It meant medication, doctor visits, and a lifestyle change Bernice couldn't afford to manage alone. The moment they got home from the clinic, Elara made her decision. She withdrew from school, not because she lacked ambition, but because she understood what mattered more. Every day she worked shifts at a local diner, double shifts when rent neared. At night she filled her mother's pill organizer, brought her warm tea, and sat quietly as Bernice rested her head on her lap. "I didn't raise you to stop chasing your future," Bernice whispered one night. Elara smiled softly. "You didn't, but you also raised me to never forget who gave me mine." It wasn't an easy life. There were nights when Elara lay awake, wondering what would have happened if her mother hadn't gotten sick. Would she have graduated, interned at a healthcare firm, made enough to pull them out of the neighborhood? But then she'd hear her mother coughing in the next room, and she'd remember why she stayed. It wasn't sacrifice, it was love. And while her peers posted selfies from campus and sorority events, Elara learned how to budget a grocery list, write a resume, and apply for jobs that didn't require a degree, but demanded grace under pressure. She didn't complain. She moved in faith. Because when you grow up knowing the value of presence over possessions, your definition of success looks different. Elara never imagined her name would end up on the payroll of one of the most powerful tech billionaires in the country. But when a neighbor told her about an opening at a private estate outside, Palo Alto, good pay, secure housing, quiet bosses, Elara didn't hesitate. It wasn't the type of job you find online. It was the kind you hear about through whispers, through trusted circles, through the kind of background checks that take longer than the hiring process itself. After 2 interviews and a full review of her records, she got the offer: live-in domestic staff at the Vance estate. Duties included maintaining guest suites, daily prep in private wings, and light support in the kitchen. The contract was long. The non-disclosure clauses were stricter than any she'd seen. But Elara signed, not because she wanted to be a maid forever, but because she needed stability for her mother, and she wasn't afraid of honest work. When she told Bernice, her mother reached for her hand, eyes filled with both pride and concern. "Just don't let no rich man make you forget who you are," she said. Elara promised. She packed her modest suitcase, tucked her mother's Bible between her dresses, and boarded a flight to California. What she didn't know was that the house she was about to walk into wasn't just cold in temperature. It was cold in spirit, and the man at the top of it would change her life forever. The Vance estate sat like a fortress at the edge of Los Altos hills, sweeping views, towering gates, and a staff that moved like shadows. It was the kind of home you see in magazines, but never feel in real life. Modern, clean, cold. Elara arrived on a cloudy morning. A black town car dropped her at the side entrance. No one greeted her beyond the head of staff, a brisk woman named Marlene, who handed her a uniform and led her through marble corridors, like she was giving a tour of a museum. "This is not a social environment," Marlene said without looking back. "Mr. Vance values silence, discretion, efficiency." The rooms were sleek, the decor sterile. The entire house hummed with the quiet arrogance of wealth that had never been questioned. Her living quarters were small but neat, tucked on the east side of the mansion, near the linen storage and security wing. There was no family chatter here, no soft jazz playing, no smell of Sunday stew, just silence. Elara went to work immediately, beds made to exact measurements, silver polished, until it reflected light, towels folded like they were performing on a stage, days blurred together. Staff didn't speak unless necessary. And Julian Vance? He was nowhere to be seen. But the energy in the house made it clear everything here belonged to him. He didn't need to be present to control the air. And yet, Even from a distance, Elara could feel something about this house wasn't right. Not dangerous, just deeply disconnected. The first time Elara saw Julian Vance in person, he didn't even look at her. She was fluffing pillows in the great room when he walked in. Sharp suit, Bluetooth in one ear, coffee in hand. No nod, no acknowledgement. Just a man moving through his home like a ghost in command. Over the next few weeks, she noticed the patterns. He rose early, slept late, ate alone, spoke mostly through his assistant. He never raised his voice, but people still jumped to fulfill his requests, like a wrong move could cost them everything. Where some staff saw arrogance, Elara saw something else: loneliness. There were days when Julian stood by the window for minutes at a time, just watching the world pass, eyes distant, jaw tight, shoulders heavy with things unspoken. Elara never interrupted. She moved like silence beside him, completing her tasks, cleaning his study, restocking his fridge, folding his clothes with a care that came not from servitude, but from habit. She didn't judge him. She knew what it was like to hold in emotion, to perform strength even when you were tired, to build walls so tall that even kindness felt like an attack. Julian was a mystery to most, but Elara saw him clearly, and though neither of them knew it yet, the quiet woman from South Dallas and the guarded genius from Connecticut were about to become the most unlikely connection either had ever known. The mansion was unusually quiet that night. Even for a place built on silence, something about the air felt heavier. Elara had stayed behind to finish her rotation, polishing the downstairs surfaces, organizing linen carts, and preparing the guest wing for a group of investors expected the next morning. It was past 10 when she moved toward the east corridor where Julian's study sat, tucked deep behind soundproof glass and biometric locks. Normally, she avoided that hallway altogether, unless she was assigned to clean it. Tonight, however, she needed to retrieve a tray she'd mistakenly left on the console table earlier. As she walked, she noticed the faintest sound, a metallic thud from the direction of the study. Elara paused. Another sound followed, something like the crack of wood or glass under stress. Her stomach tightened. Julian never allowed disturbances near that room. Even staff with years of seniority knew better than to linger around it. Yet now, something felt terribly wrong. She approached with cautious steps. The door was slightly open. That alone was alarming. The study never sat open. Julian kept it tightly secured, and any misalignment triggered an alert to security. Her heartbeat quickened. "Elara, breathe," she whispered quietly to herself. She pushed the door open. Her breath left her body. The study looked like a battlefield. Papers scattered across the floor, drawers pulled out, the reinforced safe in the corner pried open with brute force. Shards of glass from a smashed server panel littered the carpet, and in the middle of the chaos, Julian. He lay on the floor, half turned on his side, blood streaking from his temple, his expression frozen between confusion and pain. Elara dropped to her knees. "Mr. Vance? Mr. Vance, can you hear me?" No response. Her palms trembled for a brief second, only a second, before instinct took over. She scanned the room to ensure whoever had done this wasn't still inside. Nothing moved. The intruder was gone. She turned back to Julian, her breath short, her pulse racing. His breathing was shallow but present. "Hold on, just hold on," she whispered, pushing a hand behind his head to lift him gently. It was the first time she'd ever touched him, not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a human being trying to save another. Her hands moved quickly, steady despite the panic pressing at the edges of her mind. She reached for the small towel she kept clipped to her apron and pressed it against the wound at his temple. Blood soaked through instantly. "Stay with me. You're okay. You're okay," she whispered, even though he wasn't conscious enough to hear her. She fished her phone from her pocket and dialed emergency services. 911. "What's your emergency?" "This is Elara Monroe at the Vance estate, Palo Alto. The owner, Julian Vance, has been injured. He's unconscious and bleeding from the head. There is evidence of a break-in. We need an ambulance immediately. Is he breathing?" "Yes." but shallow. Is there anyone else on the property who can assist? No, I'm the only one in this wing. Please hurry. We're sending help now. Stay with him. She hung up and slid the phone aside, her focus locked on Julian. She checked his pulse again, weak, steady. She lifted his wrist gently, whispering reassurance though he couldn't respond. Minutes passed like hours. At one point, Julian's breathing stuttered, his body shifting slightly as though fighting to wake. Ilara adjusted her hold on him, cradling his head in her lap, pressing the towel firmly yet carefully against the wound. It's okay. You're not alone, she whispered. Footsteps suddenly thundered down the hallway. Security. A guard rushed in and froze when he saw the scene. We already called emergency services, Ilara said, before he could ask. Help me clear space for the paramedics. He knelt and assisted, moving debris aside, pushing the toppled chair out of the way. The tension in the room thickened. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the night. The paramedics arrived swiftly. They guided Ilara back gently but respectfully, her clothing streaked with Julian's blood. You did the right thing, one of them said, checking Julian's vitals. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Ilara followed until they reached the ambulance doors. She didn't try to climb in. The paramedics didn't ask her to. But when Julian was lifted into the vehicle, she stayed there, hands clasped, heart pounding. He needed someone in that moment, even if it meant she stayed outside the doors. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the estate walls, transforming them from polished stone into a blur of emergency urgency. Yet through all of it, Ilara stayed composed, not frozen, not frantic, steady. The paramedics worked on Julian inside the ambulance, the soft rhythm of medical dialogue floating out the open doors. A second team arrived moments later to assess the crime scene, interviewing staff who had been called from their quarters. But Ilara remained near the vehicle, hands gripping each other, eyes fixed on Julian's still figure. Her courage didn't roar. It remained quiet and anchored. One paramedic stepped out briefly. Miss Monroe, are you family? No, she said softly, shaking her head. Then why are you still here? She swallowed. Because he shouldn't wake up alone. The man paused, looked at her fully, then nodded in understanding before re-entering the vehicle. Security tried to usher her aside, but the lead guard intervened. She's the one who found him, he said. Let her stay. Moments stretched. Ilara could feel fear curling in her chest, not for herself, but for the man inside. She had never seen Julian vulnerable, never seen him anything but controlled and distant. Seeing him unconscious, covered in blood, shook something inside her she didn't yet have words for. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. Stay with me, she whispered toward the ambulance. Those weren't words a maid should say to her employer. But in crisis, titles meant nothing. Only humanity did. Inside the ambulance, Julian stirred. Barely. His eyelids fluttered as though fighting gravity. The paramedic nearest him noticed. He's trying to wake, he said quietly. Ilara stepped closer, her hands gripping the doorframe lightly. Mr. Vance? The paramedic coaxed. Julian's eyes opened just a sliver, unfocused, searching. Light bounced off the edge of the metal railing beside him, and he winced softly. Then his gaze drifted, slowly, toward the open doorway, toward her. Ilara watched his expression shift, not into fear or confusion, but recognition. Deep, clear recognition. For a fraction of a second, the distance between billionaire CEO and house staff disappeared entirely. His lips parted, trying to speak. But he couldn't. His eyes held hers with a silent plea, one she couldn't interpret in full, but understood enough to stay exactly where she stood. It's okay, she whispered. You're not alone. Julian blinked once, as if holding on to her voice. Then his eyes closed again. The paramedic nodded at Ilara. That's the last thing he saw before going under. Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected that truth to carry weight, yet it did. Because when someone is at their weakest, the person they focus on the most is often the one their heart trusts without permission. Ilara didn't know what Julian felt in that moment, but she knew what she saw in his eyes. Something unguarded, something honest. After the ambulance pulled away, police cars lined the estate driveway. Officers moved in structured formations, canvassing the mansion, interviewing staff, documenting the state of Julian's study. The head detective gathered everyone in the great room, including Ilara. Someone knew his routines, he said. Someone knew where the safe was. Someone knew the blind spots in security. A ripple of unease moved through the staff. The detective's questions were sharp, direct, probing each person about their whereabouts during the time of the break-in. When it was Ilara's turn, he studied her closely. "You're the one who found him?" "Yes," she answered calmly. "You were working off schedule?" "I was finishing tasks left from earlier. You didn't see anyone leaving the study? No unfamiliar movement?" "No." The detective paused. With a staff this size, the odds point inward. Someone knew this house too well. Murmurs spread. But Ilara remained quiet. She didn't defend herself with emotional theatrics. She didn't get offended. She didn't break under pressure. She simply told the truth. When the detective pressed further, "Did Mr. Vance ever confide anything to you? Mention concerns? Suspicion?" Ilara shook her head. "No." He kept to himself. Her voice held no bitterness. No fear. Just respect. The same respect she held when she knelt beside him on the study floor, pressing her towel to his wound, hoping he would survive. After questioning wrapped, the detective approached her quietly. "You stayed with him the entire time?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he was human. Because she had instincts to protect. Because something inside her refused to leave him alone in that moment." But she didn't say any of that. She simply replied, "It was the right thing to do." He nodded slowly. And for the first time since arriving, he seemed to understand who she truly was. Not a suspect, not a threat. A woman of loyalty. A woman with values so solid they didn't crack under interrogation. A woman who, without hesitation, protected a man who barely spoke to her. The detective closed his notebook. "This house is safer with you in it," he said. Ilara didn't smile, but she felt the truth of his words settle into her spirit. Her life at the Vance estate would never be the same after this night. And neither would Julian's. Julian Vance was not used to needing help, so waking up in a hospital bed with stitches at his temple, a bruised rib, and orders to rest felt less like healing, and more like exposure. He hated being out of control, hated lying still while the world moved on without his input. But each time he blinked his eyes open, groggy and aching, there she was, Ilara, sitting by the window with her hands folded, sometimes reading, sometimes humming softly, sometimes simply watching the sunrise as if it belonged to her. She didn't ask questions. She didn't talk too much. She just stayed. And that unnerved Julian more than anything else, because she wasn't obligated to be there. And yet, every day, morning to dusk, she showed up. At first he pretended not to notice. When the doctors spoke, he listened. When the nurses adjusted his fore, he nodded. But when Ilara walked in with a thermos of herbal tea or gently rearranged the flowers on the nightstand, something inside him paused. "Why are you here?" he asked one morning, voice hoarse. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because you shouldn't wake up alone." It was the first time anyone had ever said that to him. Julian had grown used to solitude. In his world, silence wasn't a punishment. It was protection. But Ilara didn't invade that silence. She filled it with presence. And gradually, that presence began to feel like peace. It took a week for Julian to start talking. Not about the break-in, not about the investigation or his company, but about himself. They were sitting in his hospital room, the television on mute, the windows letting in soft light from a rainy afternoon. "My father once told me emotions were like faulty wiring," he said suddenly. "If you let them in, they short-circuit your purpose." Ilara looked up from the newspaper she was skimming. And what did you believe? That he was right. For a long time, he didn't elaborate, but she didn't rush him. Julian turned his head toward her, the fore still taped to his arm. "He never hugged me. Never told me he was proud. Only asked for results. Grades, trophies, wins. Love felt like a transaction. I never had enough currency for... Ilara nodded slowly. Sounds like you were raised to perform, not to feel. He blinked. She said it without judgment, without pity, just truth. And the people who did try to get close? He added, quieter now. They always wanted something, so I stopped letting anyone... You thought I wanted something too, she said. Julian didn't answer. She didn't press. He looked out the window. That night, when you found me on the floor, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not knowing who to call. Ilara's voice was steady. You didn't have to call me. I showed up anyway. That was the first time he let his head fall back against the pillow and rest. Not just physically, but emotionally. The first time his walls cracked enough to let a sliver of light in. The shift happened slowly. Julian began noticing things he hadn't before. How Ilara always brought fresh fruit, even when he insisted he wasn't hungry. How she remembered to ask the nurse for a warm blanket on colder evenings. How she spoke gently to everyone, from the receptionist to the janitor. One afternoon, she was reading aloud from a mystery novel she brought. Her voice was calm, rhythmic, soothing. Julian stared at her. She glanced up. What? Nothing, he replied, looking away too quickly. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. She wasn't flashy. She didn't chase attention. But something about her steadiness made him feel grounded, not evaluated. When she laughed at something mildly funny, he caught himself smiling. When she reached across the table to refill his tea, he watched her fingers a second longer than necessary. He began to wait for her visits. Not in a needy way, at least that's what he told himself, but in the way a man waits for clarity in a world full of noise. Their conversations deepened. They shared memories. Ilara told him about her mother's health battles, her life before California, the decisions that had shaped her strength. He listened closely, not as a CEO, as a man. And somewhere between her soft words and his silent glances, a question began forming in the spaces between them. Could this be more than proximity? They sat by the hospital rooftop garden on a Saturday afternoon. Julian had finally been cleared to walk with assistants, and he requested a change of scenery. Ilara helped him into the elevator. Neither of them spoke during the ride up. When they reached the top, Julian sat on a bench and looked out across the city skyline. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you were born into something else? He asked. Ilara turned to him. I used to, but then I realized everything I became came from where I started. Julian nodded slowly. My parents built their lives on perfection. Everything had to be flawless. Academics, image, discipline. I wasn't allowed to lose, not even in board games. He chuckled bitterly. By age 12, I'd memorized every chess opening. By 15, I was in boarding school with a tutor in 5 languages. By 21, I had my first IPO, and still lonely, Ilara said quietly. He didn't deny it. They didn't beat me. They didn't neglect me, he added. But they also didn't touch me unless it was for photos. My father shook my hand more than he hugged me. My mother applauded my scores, not my efforts. Ilara exhaled softly. You were built, not raised. Julian looked at her with something between gratitude and grief. I learned how to win, but I never learned how to connect. She sat beside him. And now... He glanced at her hand, resting quietly near his. Now, I'm learning. When Julian was finally discharged and returned to the estate, something had shifted, not just in him, but in the air around the mansion. The staff remained formal. The corridors still echoed with quiet efficiency. But Ilara's presence was different now, not louder, but known. Julian began to expect her around. She returned to her duties without hesitation, preparing rooms, folding linens, organizing, deliveries. But her role had changed in one critical way. He saw her now. He began greeting her in the mornings, asking how she was, noticing when she looked tired, offering tea instead of simply taking it. He didn't make any grand gestures, no romantic declarations, no inappropriate requests. He simply started to make room for her in small, intentional ways. Elara, for her part, remained graceful. She didn't confuse gratitude with promises. She didn't mistake his softer tone for something he hadn't spoken aloud. She allowed the space to evolve without pressure. One evening, Julian passed her in the hallway and paused. "Elara," she turned. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" He hesitated. "Thank you for being there." When I couldn't ask, she gave a small nod, eyes steady. "You're welcome." No flirtation, no assumptions, just warmth. The kind that lingers long after footsteps fade. The mansion returned to rhythm, but something had shifted, something unspoken. Julian Vance had resumed his duties at Vance Systems with methodical precision. Board meetings, strategy sessions, and development reviews filled his calendar again. The media buzzed with relief. Investors relaxed. His staff resumed their usual pace. But in the quiet spaces between all that control, Julian noticed a new habit forming. He looked for her. In the mornings, he paused longer near the kitchen wing, just in case she was there adjusting the breakfast spread. In the evenings, when he passed the central courtyard, his eyes drifted toward the path Elara usually took back to her quarters. It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't calculated. It was instinct. She didn't hover. She didn't break the rules of professionalism. But she moved through the estate like a quiet pulse, reliable, warm, present. One Tuesday morning, Julian stepped into the music room. No one used it anymore, not since his mother's piano had gone untouched for years. But Elara was there. She stood by the window, watering the indoor plants. Sunlight framed her face, and for a moment, Julian said nothing. She turned, not startled, just aware. "Good morning, Mr. Vance." He nodded. "Didn't know anyone came in here." "I like the stillness," she said. "Some rooms don't feel heavy if you let air and water move through them." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Is that a theory or a philosophy?" "Just something my mother used to say." He didn't respond, just watched her quietly. Then, with no reason at all, he stayed. And as she finished tending the plants and turned to leave, he spoke again. "Elara." She looked back. "Thank you." She gave a soft nod, then exited the room. He stood there for a long time after, and the piano, for the first time in years, didn't feel like it belonged to ghosts. It started with small things. Julian began finding folded notes on his desk, reminders to eat, little affirmations handwritten in simple script. He never asked who left them, but he knew. Elara never admitted to them either, but she always smiled when he mentioned how helpful they were. Their moments grew quietly, like wildflowers in the cracks of a concrete schedule. They never touched. They never flirted, but their eyes said what their mouths never did. Julian began asking for her during private staff requests. "Have Elara handle the evening suite setup," he'd say. Or, "Let Elara coordinate the guest wing preparations." It wasn't favoritism. It was familiarity. He wanted her around, not because she did the job better, but because she brought something into the room that softened it. She asked questions he'd never been asked before. "What makes you feel peace? Do you believe healing has a deadline? Who taught you how to love?" He didn't always answer, but the fact that someone asked, that was new. He started sharing things slowly, not grand confessions, just pieces of truth, about his childhood insomnia, his inability to eat unless alone, the anxiety that came when things were too quiet. Elara listened, sometimes with a slight tilt of the head, other times with a faint smile, but always with full presence. They built something unspoken, something sacred, a connection neither announced nor denied. It was too early for definitions, too deep for denial, and too honest to hide from themselves much longer. One night, during a rare off-schedule dinner, Julian requested a private meal served outside on the garden patio, overlooking the lit-up fountain that hadn't worked in years until she'd quietly arranged for it to be repaired. He didn't want a chef, just something warm. Elara prepared it herself: lemon-roasted chicken, soft rolls, sautéed greens. He didn't expect much, but the flavor startled him. "You cooked this?" he asked mid-bite. She shrugged lightly. "Just a little something I learned growing up." He set his fork down. "It tastes like memory." That made her smile for real. They didn't talk about work that night. They talked about dreams, about fears, about whether forgiveness required understanding or simply acceptance. When she rose to clear the dishes, his hand brushed hers. Just a touch. But it was enough. The moment lingered, not electric, not forced, but real. Another night, Julian found her in the staff hallway, carrying a box of folded linens. He reached to take it from her. "You don't have to," she started. "I want to," he replied. Their fingers touched again, longer this time. No one saw them, no cameras, no staff nearby, just two people suspended in a moment that didn't need permission to feel right. It wasn't about crossing boundaries. It was about removing distance, inch by inch. The sky was bruised with twilight when it happened. Julian had spent the entire day dodging meetings, irritable from back-to-back calls. Nothing had gone right. Stock dips, client hesitations, board pressure. At sunset, he stepped out onto the upper-level balcony outside his study. The cool air calmed his nerves. He wasn't alone. Elara stood at the railing, eyes on the horizon. He didn't speak. He simply joined her. They stood in silence for several minutes, side by side, shoulders not quite touching, breathing in sync. She finally said, "You don't need to outrun the day every time it gets hard." Julian exhaled. "If I slow down, I feel everything. Maybe that's not the worst thing." He turned to look at her. "You always see the softness in people, even when they've shown you their hardest parts." "That's how I survive," she replied. "I don't unsee pain. I outlove it." Julian reached for her hand. This time, he didn't hesitate. She didn't pull away. He turned fully toward her, eyes searching hers with quiet urgency. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "You needed someone to remind you that you were still human." He stepped closer, their hands still joined. "Can I?" Elara didn't answer with words. She leaned in. Their kiss was slow, unrushed, a conversation between souls that had been waiting to speak for far too long. There was no promise spoken, no label assigned, just honesty shared through lips that finally found their courage. The next few days held a different rhythm, more intentional. Julian began asking about her, not her tasks, not her schedule, but her. "What did you want to be before life pulled you here? What's something you've never told anyone? What does freedom look like to you?" They spoke during late walks in the garden after most staff had left for the day. One evening, she answered him while they sat under the pergola. "I wanted to work in healthcare administration," she said. "Not because I wanted to run hospitals. I just wanted to build systems that gave people dignity while they healed." Julian listened like every word mattered. "I lost that dream when my mother got sick," she continued. "But sometimes I think I could still chase it, quietly. My way." "You could do anything," he said, no hesitation in his voice. She turned toward him. "You really believe that?" "I do." That night, she gave him a piece of herself that few had earned. She told him about the night her mother passed, the guilt, the stillness, the strength it took to carry on. Julian didn't offer solutions. He just reached for her hand again and held it with reverence. Not possession, not desire, just shared space. From that moment forward, Elara knew. He wasn't just inviting her into his world anymore. He was asking to be part of hers. The weeks following Julian's return from the hospital were tense, not between him and Elara, but within the walls of the Vance estate. Security patrols doubled. Access cards were updated. Doors that once opened freely now required layered verification. The serenity the mansion once clung to felt replaced by caution. The detective in charge of the break-in came back several times, each visit more focused than the last. The intruder had been precise, too precise for someone unfamiliar with the house. Locks were bypassed, blind spots exploited, and the safe had been cracked, in a way that suggested intimate knowledge rather than brute force. The detective eventually called a full staff meeting. Julian stood stiffly at the front of the great room, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes scanned each employee. Elara watched him silently from the back, her expression calm but alert. She had cleaned those hallways for months. She knew the routines. She knew the echo of footsteps. She knew the weight of responsibility that came with working in a home where trust wasn't handed out freely. The detective cleared his throat. "We have reason to believe the perpetrator had extensive knowledge of the estate structure and Mr. Vance's schedule." A murmur spread across the room. Julian didn't flinch, but his posture sharpened. "We've reviewed surveillance. Several cameras were disabled professionally. This wasn't random," the detective continued. "Someone either helped the intruder or provided inside information." The words hung over the room like a storm cloud. The detective stepped closer to Julian. "Someone here knows more than they've said." Elara didn't react outwardly, but she felt the shift, the way suspicion seeped through the staff like cold water. People exchanged glances. A few stepped away from the cluster. A house like this ran on hierarchy, and tension climbed that hierarchy fast. Julian spoke suddenly. "When I hired every one of you, I vetted your records, your backgrounds, your references." His tone remained level, but frustration simmered beneath it. Someone violated that trust. He didn't point fingers. He didn't have to. The atmosphere changed instantly. The once orderly staff dynamics now felt strained. Side eyes, clipped conversations, whispered theories. Hours stretched long. Duties were performed with stiff formality. Elara remained steady through it all, performing her responsibilities with the same quiet grace she always had. But she could feel the weight of the investigation tightening like a rope around every single person in that house. And though she didn't yet know it, that tightening rope was inching toward her. It happened late one evening. The mansion was dim, resting in that strange stillness that only large houses knew, rooms waiting patiently for morning light. Julian had stayed in his study longer than usual, poring over the detective's latest report. It wasn't definitive, but it pointed towards someone with access to the east corridor. Someone who could move quietly. Someone who worked in proximity to his private areas. Someone who fit Elara's schedule. The conclusion wasn't supported enough to be fact, but it matched every fear Julian had spent years trying to bury. Abandonment, betrayal, blind trust. He hated how fast his heart picked up when he saw her name even mentioned near a point of suspicion. The memory of her hands on his bloodied face, her quiet compassion, her presence in the hospital, they all clashed violently against the possibility that she could have been tied to the break-in. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. But fear, when triggered, doesn't negotiate. Fear takes the wheel. When Elara entered the study to drop off fresh linens, something she'd done countless times, Julian didn't greet her. He didn't look up. He simply said her name with a voice so cold it sliced the air. "Elara." She paused near the doorway. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" He lifted the report from his desk, fingers rigid. The detective believes the intruder had inside help. She nodded once, slowly. "I heard." Julian inhaled through his nose. "Your name appears twice." She didn't move, but her brow tightened. "In what context?" "You had access to that hallway," he replied sharply. "You were working unusually late that night. You were the one who found me. The intruder disabled cameras near your assigned corridor." Her breath stilled, not out of guilt, but out of understanding what was happening. He wasn't reasoning with her. He was projecting onto her. "Are you suggesting I had anything to do with someone hurting you?" she asked softly. His eyes flashed. "I'm asking why your schedule doesn't match your log sheet." "Because I stayed to finish my tasks," she answered, tone steady. "The same reason I've stayed late before." He stood abruptly. "Convenient." Elara didn't flinch, but the accusation cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. "Julian," she said quietly, dropping the formality for the first time in weeks. "Look at me." He did, and that was the worst part, because he didn't see her. He saw fear disguised as certainty. He saw a lifetime of betrayal flashing in front of him, blurred into the shape of her face. "Elara," he said, voice tightening. Did you help them? Her eyes shone, but not with tears. With disbelief. After everything they'd shared, every unspoken emotion, every quiet evening, every moment of trust, this was what fear had convinced him to ask. No, she answered. Firm. Clear. I would never. He looked away. And in that moment, she realized he wasn't accusing her because he believed she was guilty. He was accusing her because he wasn't capable of believing she wasn't. The confrontation didn't end with questions. It ended with dismissal. Julian walked toward the study door and held it open, not as a courtesy but as closure. You should take the rest of the week off. She stared at him, stunned. You're removing me from the house. I need space, he said, voice rigid. I need clarity. You're pushing me away because you're scared, she replied quietly. Not because I've done anything wrong. That's enough, he snapped. Not loud, just final. We can't continue, whatever this was. Ilara stepped back as though struck. She had stood by him in his most vulnerable moments. She had held his head in her lap while his blood soaked her hands. She had visited him every day in the hospital, bringing him comfort he didn't know how to name. She had kissed him on that balcony with sincerity he had never earned. And yet here he was, closing the door on her, not because she betrayed him, but because he was incapable of trusting someone he cared for. He exhaled sharply, avoiding her eyes. This ends now. Ilara didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply nodded, dignity intact, heart breaking slowly but silently. If that's what you need, she whispered, I'll go. She turned and walked down the hallway, each step steady, though the world blurred around her. Julian stood in the doorway long after she disappeared, but he didn't call her back. Fear didn't let him. Ilara returned to her quarters that night with a numbness she didn't know how to dissect. The room looked the same, simple furniture, folded blankets, soft lighting, but everything inside her felt altered, broken. She packed her essentials into a small suitcase, hands steady, but spirit heavy. By morning, she was gone. She sent a formal resignation through email, thanking the estate for the opportunity, expressing gratitude, remaining respectful in every line. She didn't mention Julian. She didn't mention the nights they spoke about childhood scars. She didn't mention the dinners under warm garden lights. She didn't mention the kiss she'd allowed her heart to believe in. She simply left. Her mother's old apartment in Texas had been leased out years ago, so she found temporary housing in a small studio outside Mountain View. It was nothing special. Peach-colored walls, a narrow kitchen, a thrift store sofa, but it was hers. She spent the next few days working part-time shifts at a local cafe, keeping busy, so her mind wouldn't dwell too long on the emotional wounds still raw within her. But each night, when she lay down, she thought of Julian. Not the CEO, not the man who dismissed her, but the man who once looked at her as though she was the only connection grounding him to the world. She didn't regret loving him. She just regretted he never learned how to believe in love. Weeks passed quietly. Her appetite dwindled slightly. She felt tired more often. She chalked it up to stress, emotional exhaustion, moving too quickly, eating irregularly. She didn't know her body was already changing. She didn't know she was carrying the last remnants of a love story that ended before it fully lived. 2 weeks after leaving the mansion, Ilara woke with a wave of dizziness strong enough to force her back onto the mattress. Her CO worker, a kind woman named Liddy, noticed her pale skin and insisted she visit the urgent care clinic on Castro Street. Ilara reluctantly agreed. She expected the doctor to tell her she was dehydrated or stressed. Instead, after running basic tests and asking a few questions, the doctor smiled gently, and Ilara's heart stopped. Ilara, you're pregnant. Her breath caught. Pregnant? The doctor continued, unaware of the emotional avalanche that sentence unleashed inside her. And based on the hormone levels, she added, it's not just one. Ilara's eyes widened. The doctor touched her hand lightly. It appears you're expecting 3 triplets, 3 lives, 3 babies, 3 reflections of a man who had shut his heart on the very week she conceived them. Ilara's world didn't crumble. It shifted. Quietly, powerfully, permanently. She pressed a hand to her stomach, her eyes filling, not with fear but with awe. Julian's children. Her children. Their children. But she didn't think of calling him. She didn't imagine his reaction. She didn't picture returning to the mansion. Instead, one thought pulsed in her spirit. I will raise them with love. I will raise them with strength. I will raise them the way I was raised. She walked out of the clinic with a steady step, a new chapter forming beneath her heartbeat. A chapter Julian wouldn't discover for years. A chapter Ilara would live with courage. A chapter that began not with a romance, but with resilience. The paper lay flat on her kitchen table, creased at the corners from how tightly she'd gripped it earlier. Confirmation, not just of pregnancy, but of 3 heartbeats. Ilara stared at the ultrasound printout, her fingers gently tracing the outline of the tiny forms nestled together. Triplets. 3. She sat back, her body still aching with fatigue, but her mind racing. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried since the day she left Julian's mansion. Her tears had dried up somewhere between heartbreak and survival. She looked at the ceiling as if searching for answers. Did he deserve to know? Would he care? Would he try to control the situation the way he controlled everything else? She thought of the last words he said to her, cold, closed off, drenched in a fear he never admitted but always operated from. This ends now. Not us. Not, I need time. Not, I'm scared. Just end it. That wasn't love. That wasn't partnership. That was a man still ruled by suspicion. And if he couldn't trust her heart, he didn't deserve her truth. Ilara folded the paper neatly and tucked it into her journal. She would raise them herself. She would not chase him for help, not for validation, not for protection. She would become both mother and fortress. Her babies would know love, even if they never knew their father. Ilara left Silicon Valley before the 2nd trimester began. She relocated to Sacramento, a quieter, more affordable city with just enough pace to keep her grounded and enough space to raise 3 boys in peace. She rented a small 2-bedroom duplex near a local park. The neighbors were warm. The community center nearby offered prenatal yoga. And best of all, nobody asked who the father was. She got work at a medical billing office, not glamorous, but enough to keep the lights on and her insurance active. It was honest work, and her supervisor appreciated her focus. At night, she journaled, something she hadn't done in years. Letters to her unborn children filled the pages. You were not planned, but you are wanted. I will not let this world harden you the way it did your father. We may not have luxury, but we will have joy. The pregnancy was exhausting. There were days her body refused to cooperate. Nights when she sat in the bathtub with aching feet and closed eyes, whispering prayers to get through the next hour. She didn't complain. She adjusted. Neighbors pitched in. A retired midwife offered to check on her weekly. The woman who owned the corner market insisted she take extra cartons of milk without charge. Ilara's presence earned respect, not pity. When the boys came, Rowan first, then Avery, then Finley, they arrived in a flurry of noise, light, and soft cries that filled every hollow place in her heart. And in the quiet hospital room, holding all 3, she whispered, "You are not the end of anything. You are the beginning of everything I didn't know I needed." It didn't take long to see Julian in all 3 boys. It was in their eyes, stormy grey with flecks of silver. In the quiet way they stared before they spoke, like little thinkers processing more than they let on. But that's where the similarity ended. Rowan was the watcher. From his earliest days, he observed before acting. He'd sit in his crib, following Ilara's every move as if memorizing her rhythm. He rarely cried, rarely fussed. When he eventually began talking, his words were deliberate, each one chosen with surprising care for a toddler. Avery was the spark, loudest cry, brightest laugh, quick to frustration, but just as quick to forgive. He'd barrel into hugs, knock over blocks, sing gibberish melodies that made Ilara burst out laughing while doing dishes. He was the only one who clapped at his own jokes. Finley was the dreamer. He hummed in his sleep. He stared at windows during storms, reaching toward the sky as if trying to understand its mood. He was sensitive to sounds, textures, even emotions. When Ilara cried once quietly after a rough day, he waddled over with his pacifier and placed it gently in her hand, like he knew she needed comfort too. They each carried parts of Julian, but they were hers, fully, deeply, lovingly hers. And when she saw them all sprawled out on the carpet at 5 a.m., one tangled in a blanket, another trying to eat crayons, and the third building towers from cereal boxes, Ilara didn't feel loss. She felt purpose. By the time the boys turned 2, Ilara had returned to work part-time. She began as a clinic assistant, filing charts, helping with check-ins, handling insurance calls. But her natural efficiency and calm under pressure caught the attention of the clinic director. "You've got leadership in you," he said one day. She smiled politely. "Not interested?" "No, I just don't assume I'll be offered it." A month later, he offered her a role as a scheduling coordinator. From there, she worked her way into admin management, eventually becoming the clinic's operations supervisor by the boy's 4th birthday. She balanced growth with grace. Every meeting she led ended on time. Every patient interaction she handled de-escalated smoothly. She knew how to diffuse conflict without raising her voice, how to train new hires without condescension, and how to model professionalism even on 4 hours of sleep. At home, she was still wiping applesauce off walls and negotiating bedtime with 3 versions of no, but at work, she was respected. More than that, she was valued. Her team referred to her as the calm in the storm. Parents of patients wrote her thank you notes. The clinic began seeing a drop in employee turnover. She didn't wear heels. She didn't have business cards. But she carried power the way she carried her boys, close to her chest and rooted in love. Julian's name was never uttered in anger, not once. When Rowan asked why they didn't have a dad like some of his friends, Ilara replied honestly, "He was someone I cared about deeply, but we went different ways." "Did he love us?" Avery had asked. "I don't know," she answered softly. "But I love you more than enough." That became their anchor. She didn't curse him. She didn't demonize him, but she also didn't fantasize about reconciliation. She remembered the look in his eyes when he asked her if she betrayed him, the way his voice froze her heart, the cold echo of, "This ends now." Forgiveness didn't erase memory. She had made peace with his absence, but that didn't mean she erased what it cost her. Sometimes, in the stillness of early mornings, while packing the boys' lunchboxes or buttoning their little shirts, her mind drifted to the man who once said she made him feel human, to the balcony kiss that felt like truth, to the moment he chose fear over faith. She wondered what he'd think if he saw them now. If he saw Avery dancing in pajamas, if he saw Finley drawing clouds with crayons on the walls, if he saw Rowan reading books far beyond his age, she wondered if he ever missed her. But she didn't dwell there long, because life moved forward, and Ilara, she walked with it, head high, love steady, eyes focused. The email came on a Thursday morning while Ilara was finalizing quarterly staffing reports. The subject line read, "Invitation, West Coast Healthcare Leadership Summit, Panel Speaker Offer." At first, she assumed it was a mistake. She wasn't a CEO, not a consultant, not even someone who considered herself part of the thought leader crowd. She was a woman who carved her way through administrative systems, quietly, steadily, without seeking attention. But the message was addressed to her directly. "Dear Ms. Hale, your work in patient-centered operational reform has been noted by the Regional Advisory Board. We would be honored if you would join our panel on innovative clinic leadership. Location, San Jose Convention Center, the heart of Silicon Valley." Julian's world. The air left her lungs. She set the laptop aside and stared at the twins' drawings taped to her office wall. Stick. Figures holding balloons, a messy scribble of a house, a trio of smiley faces labeled us. Her heart thudded. She hadn't been back since she left. She avoided that entire stretch of California, like it was sacred ground she no longer had permission to walk on. But this invitation wasn't personal. It wasn't about him. She had earned it through her own resilience, her own work, her own growth. Still, the mention of San Jose stirred the dust of old memories. The mansion, hallways, the late conversations, the balcony kiss, the accusations. Yet the invitation represented something bigger than fear. It represented progress, a version of herself she fought hard to build. The woman she became after losing everything. She sat back in her chair, breathing slowly. This was an honor, a milestone. And despite everything that happened with Julian, she had every right to say yes. That night, after the boys fell asleep curled together like three sleepy puppies, Alara sat by the kitchen table with chamomile tea cooling between her palms. The question haunted her. Should I go? Returning to Silicon Valley wasn't just geography. It was emotional terrain she had buried. She didn't fear seeing him. She feared the possibility of seeing the person she used to be. The woman who loved a man who didn't know how to believe her. The woman who walked away because there was no other choice. The woman who built her strength from the pieces he left behind. Her mind tugged between hesitation and determination. She whispered to the stillness, "What am I afraid of?" The fear wasn't Julian. It was the memory of hope. Yet, as she looked toward the boys' bedroom door, she realized something. Every step she took mattered to them. If she turned down this opportunity because of an old heartbreak, she would be teaching them fear instead of courage. Rowan's thoughtful stare, Avery's fearless grin, Finley's gentle curiosity. They were watching her grow into the person who would shape their understanding of the world. She opened her laptop again, reread the invitation, and this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a calling. She clicked accept, not for nostalgia, not for closure, not for him, for her sons, for the life she intended to build for them, for the example she wanted to set. The flight to San Jose was short, but her heartbeat seemed to stretch across every mile of the journey. When she stepped off the plane with 3 4-year-old boys in tow, something in her posture had changed. She wasn't the shy young maid who once walked the halls of the Vance estate with quiet uncertainty. She held herself differently now, shoulders back, steps steady, spirit grounded. The boys clung to their small rolling suitcases, blue, green, and yellow, moving in crooked formation next to her. "Mummy, is this where you used to live?" Rowan asked. "No, sweetie," she answered. "Just a place I've been before." Avery looked around dramatically. "Looks busy." Finley pressed his nose to the window near baggage claim. "The buildings look tall." Alara smiled softly. San Jose had always been loud, ambitious, restless, but she stood in the terminal, without feeling overshadowed by any of it. They stayed in a modest but comfortable hotel near Market Street. The conference organizers sent a welcome basket, fresh fruit, notebooks, and a handwritten card from the event director welcoming her to the summit. That night, as she ironed her blazer and reviewed her speaking notes, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She didn't look like the girl Julian accused. She didn't look like the woman who cried in a clinic hallway as she learned she was carrying 3 babies alone. She looked like someone who fought for her future and won. She looked like strength. The next morning, the boys were a whirlwind of questions and excitement. Avery jumped on the bed shouting, "What time is breakfast? Is there waffles? I want waffles." Finley, dreamy-eyed as always, walked to the window and whispered, "The sun looks different here." Rowan sat at the small hotel desk, examining the conference pamphlet. "Mommy, what does keynote mean?" She laughed and kissed the top of his head. "It means someone is giving an important speech." "Like you?" he asked. Her heart warmed. "Yes, sweetheart, like me." They accompanied her to the childcare annex the conference set up for attendees with families. The boys immediately charmed the staff. 3 of them, all with those striking eyes. "They're adorable." "How do you manage?" Alara smiled. One day at a time, Rowan began assembling a puzzle. Avery ran straight to the toy cars. Finley wandered to a craft table and started drawing something he couldn't explain yet. Their personalities blossomed wherever they went. independent, joyful, curious. Strangers paused to compliment them. One woman said they looked like little executives. Elara nearly choked at the accuracy. The boys didn't know they carried their father's face. But she did, and sometimes the resemblance made her chest tighten in a way that was neither pain nor longing, but a mix of both. Still, she never let it show. Her sons deserved a mother fully present, not overshadowed by past grief. The first shift happened during her panel session. Elara stepped onto the stage wearing a navy suit and confidence like a second skin. Her voice was calm, controlled, sincere. Audience members leaned in. Pens moved quickly across notepads. People nodded at her insights. After the session ended, several industry leaders approached her. "You've got a rare perspective. Your ideas about patient empathy are remarkable. Would love to connect after the summit." But one interaction made her freeze, not because of the words, but because of the badge. Advanced Systems, Innovation Division. She held her smile steady. "Your work is impressive," the woman said. "We've been researching clinics improving operating efficiency. Your name came up often." Elara thanked her politely, but her pulse stumbled. Advanced Systems. Her past was no longer miles away. It was in the same building, the same event, walking the same halls. Later that afternoon, she stepped into the outdoor courtyard of the convention center to take a breath. Her sons were inside the childcare area, painting cardboard rockets. She stared at the line of palm trees swaying gently, grounding herself. Everything felt almost familiar, almost like a door she once closed was nudging open, not with force, not with drama, with possibility. Fate wasn't loud. It was quiet, subtle, like a shift in air pressure, like a familiar name on a stranger's badge, like returning to a city she swore she'd never see again, only to find she wasn't afraid this time. She didn't know Julian was only 20 minutes away. She didn't know her sons would soon walk into the very world she'd shielded them from. She didn't know Silicon Valley was holding its breath, waiting for the moment everything she left behind would rise again. But she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A turning, a gentle pull of destiny weaving her steps toward the place where her past and future were about to collide. Julian Vance wasn't supposed to be at the conference that morning. He wasn't scheduled to speak until the following afternoon, but his board had insisted he show up earlier to meet an investor group. He walked into the San Jose Convention Center with the same composed confidence. He carried everywhere, dark suit, quiet stride, expression unreadable. His assistant spoke beside him, listing numbers, projections, reminders. He barely listened. His mind was already crowded. Product launches, legal reviews, innovation rollouts, the usual noise. Then he reached the top of the grand staircase overlooking the lobby, and everything inside him stopped. Elara. He recognized her instantly, even though years had passed. She wasn't the woman who left his mansion with a broken heart. She wasn't the young maid he once dismissed. She stood with a posture shaped by resilience, dressed in quiet elegance, exuding a confidence he had never seen in her before. But that wasn't what knocked the world out of place. 3 boys stood around her. 3, all about 4 years old. 1 tugging on her sleeve with a toy car. 1 examining the patterns on the floor. 1 looking up at the ceiling lights as though studying the world. Julian froze at the top of the staircase. His chest tightened, his legs locked, his breath faltered. Because the boys didn't just resemble each other, they resembled him. Every line, every shade of grey in their eyes, every tilt of their heads, mirror images, fragments of his face, little reflections of features he saw in the mirror each morning. The world below moved on, conference attendees walking, chatting, carrying coffee cups. But to Julian, the noise dissolved into static. It was as if time had reached out and grabbed him by the throat. He whispered, barely audible even to himself, "Elara." He couldn't move. Every memory he'd tried to bury surged upward with brutal clarity. Elara sitting beside his hospital bed, reading softly. Elara laughing quietly in the garden during their late dinners. Elara's hand in his, on the balcony, the night they kissed. Elara walking away when he drove her away with fear instead of trust. He saw all of it at once, layered, overlapping, striking him from every angle. The guilt hit next, cold, sharp, immediate. He had pushed her out. He had accused her when she had done nothing but save him. He had wounded the only person who ever saw him beyond the CEO mask. And now there were 3 children who looked like his past and his future combined. He gripped the railing. His assistant kept talking until she noticed his silence. "Mr. Vance, are you—" He lifted a hand to quiet her, eyes locked on the scene below. Elara adjusted one boy's jacket. Another tugged at her hair. The third wrapped his arms around her leg, his face pressed into her side. Julian felt something sting behind his eyes. Emotion. Raw, unfiltered, uninvited. He inhaled slowly, trying to anchor himself. Flashbacks collided with present reality. Her warmth, her voice, her loyalty, his mistakes, his fear, his arrogance, every misjudgment, every word he couldn't take back, every moment he wished he could redo. The weight of it pressed on his chest. And yet, underneath all the shock, all the shame, all the disbelief, one overpowering truth settled inside him. Those boys were his. He didn't need tests. He didn't need explanations. He didn't need time. He knew. His heart knew before logic caught up. Elara sensed eyes on her before she actually turned. Mothers develop that instinct, the ability to feel when the world shifts around their children. She looked up. Julian was standing at the top of the staircase, frozen in place, staring at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Not in fear, not in anger, not even in longing. It was recognition, and something deeper beneath it. She inhaled, steadying herself. Her heart fluttered once, then held firm. She refused to let past wounds open in the middle of a crowded conference hall. Rowan tugged her sleeve. "Mummy, can we get juice?" "In a minute, love," she whispered. Her eyes returned to Julian. Slowly, he descended the stairs, each step deliberate, controlled, as though he were afraid the moment would vanish if he moved too quickly. People parted naturally as he approached. A man of his stature always commanded space, even when he didn't ask for it. But today, there was no power in his presence, only vulnerability, only disbelief, only raw emotion tightening every part of him. When he finally reached the bottom, he stopped just a few feet away from her. "Elara," he said. Her name wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a plea. It was an exhale soaked in years of regret. "Hello, Julian," she replied, voice calm. Their worlds collided in the stillness between those words. Public setting, private history, unspoken heartbreak. His eyes drifted to the boys. Her heartbeat thudded once, warning her, preparing her, reminding her to stand firm. But instead of reaching for them, Julian placed a hand over his chest as if steadying himself. "Elara," he whispered again, unable to form the next sentence. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't apologize. She didn't shield the truth. She just looked at him, steady, strong, unbroken. Years ago, she left as a woman wounded. Today, she stood as a woman transformed, and Julian felt the shift immediately. It was Finley who stepped forward first. Quiet, observant, thoughtful Finley. The one most like Julian without even knowing the man existed. He studied Julian with curious eyes, head tilted slightly, the same way Julian often analyzed people before speaking. Julian's breath hitched. The resemblance was undeniable. Finley asked softly, "Are you someone Mommy knows?" Julian swallowed hard. "Yes, I knew her a long time ago." Avery ran up next with a grin. "Do you like robots?" "'Cause I like robots." Julian blinked away the burn in his eyes. "I do like robots." Rowan approached last, cautious but polite. "You're dressed fancy." Julian let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." He crouched down slowly so he was eye level with them. "I'm Julian," he said gently. A moment of silence. 3 sets of grey eyes watched him. Then Finley asked, "Why do you look like us?" Elara inhaled sharply. Julian closed his eyes for a second. He wanted to say everything. He wanted to wrap them in truth. He wanted to claim them with the certainty pounding inside his chest. But he looked up at Ilara first. Her expression didn't threaten. It didn't beg. It simply said, "Not yet." He nodded at her, respecting a boundary she hadn't voiced but clearly held. Turning back to the boys, he answered softly, "Sometimes people look alike because life has a funny way of creating connections." Avery accepted that instantly and hugged Julian's leg before running back to the toy table nearby. Julian froze at the touch. He hadn't expected affection from a child who didn't know him. Rowan gave a shy wave. Finley continued staring, his smile small, knowing, peaceful. Julian's heart cracked open. Wide, raw, undeniable. He stood again, meeting Ilara's eyes. "You don't have to explain," he said quietly. "Not here. Not now." But the question still trembled in the air between them. "Are they mine?" And her silence held everything. The boys returned to their toys, leaving Julian and Ilara in a bubble of emotional gravity. Julian's gaze followed each movement, Rowan organizing blocks with near-perfect precision, Avery running laps around a display booth, laughing wildly, Finley sitting cross-legged on the carpet, drawing shapes in the air with his fingers as if solving a puzzle only he understood. Julian saw himself in every gesture, in Rowan's restraint, in Avery's confidence, and most painfully, in Finley's quiet smile. That soft, upward curve. It was the same smile Julian gave when something truly mattered to him. The one he didn't offer often. The one Ilara had once coaxed out of him with gentle patience. His throat tightened. He whispered, "They're beautiful." Ilara nodded softly. "Thank you." "Are they?" He couldn't say it aloud. Not yet. The words felt too heavy, too sacred to speak in a hallway filled with strangers. Ilara didn't finish the sentence for him. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She simply looked at the boys, then back at him, and let the truth linger in the space between them. Finley looked up suddenly and waved. Julian felt his heart cave in. He whispered, barely audible, "He smiles the way I used to." Ilara's eyes softened, not with tenderness for him, but with the reality that the moment she spent years preparing for was finally here. The past had found them. The future was already unfolding. And for the first time in his adult life, Julian Vance didn't know what to do next. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't walking away. Not this time. After their abrupt reunion in the conference lobby, Julian didn't speak again for several minutes. He simply stood there, watching the boys, his mind racing, his heart pounding. In a rhythm he hadn't felt since the day he pushed Ilara away. He finally found his voice. "Ilara, may I speak with you?" Somewhere quiet. She hesitated. He expected that. He deserved that. But she eventually nodded once. They stepped into a side corridor near the courtyard, bright, open, but quiet enough for honesty. The noise of the conference blurred into the background. Julian turned toward her, his posture uncharacteristically unguarded. "I owe you something," he began. His voice was low, thick with emotion he wasn't used to showing. No, not something. Everything. Ilara folded her arms lightly, not defensively but firmly. "Go on." He exhaled slowly. "I was wrong." She looked at him, expression unreadable. "I accused you," he continued. "I let fear rule me. I hurt you. I pushed you away when you were the only person who stood by me without asking for anything." His jaw tightened, regret flaring in his eyes. "I've replayed that night 1,000 times. I know exactly how cruel I sounded. I know exactly how small I made you feel. And I am ashamed." Ilara didn't soften. He continued, voice cracking ever so slightly. "I never asked you what you needed. I never asked how you felt. I only acted out of fear because caring for you scared me more than anything else." Her breath caught, but she stayed composed. Julian stepped back slightly, as if giving her space to breathe. "You were loyal, you saved my life, and I repaid you with doubt, with accusations, with dismissal." He swallowed, eyes lowering. "I'm sorry." For all of it, the apology wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was a confession from a man stripping down every wall he had ever built. But Ilara's expression didn't waver. "Thank you for saying that," she replied quietly, "but apologies don't erase consequences." His eyes met hers, steady yet pained. "I know." She nodded once, signaling the conversation wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Julian tried to speak again, but Ilara raised a hand. "There's something you need to understand," she said, her tone still gentle but reinforced with steel. He listened. "They are my sons." He drew a shaky breath, but nodded slowly. "They're not here to fix what you broke," she continued. "They're not here to fill the emptiness you feel. They're not your second chance at being the man I once thought you were." Julian's throat tightened. "They're not your redemption, Julian." He closed his eyes briefly as the words hit him, not cruelly, but truthfully. When he opened them, she continued, "For 4 years I carried them, raised them, fed them, comforted them. I held their hands through fevers, scraped knees, nightmares. I stood by them alone. I faced every difficulty alone." Julian blinked rapidly, emotion overflowing into his expression. "I'm not saying this to punish you," she added. "I'm saying this because if you ever want to be part of their lives, it will not be because you feel guilty. It will not be because you're trying to repair what you did to me." She stepped closer, voice steady. "It will be because you choose them, not yourself." Julian swallowed hard. "Ilara, She held up a hand again. "Don't promise anything yet. Don't rush into something because you're emotional from seeing them. Think about what this means." He nodded. "I am thinking about it. I haven't stopped thinking since I saw them." But Ilara wasn't finished. "To be clear," she said, "I'm not shutting the door. But I'm not opening it just because you finally showed up." Her eyes, warm but weary, met his directly. "You left once. I won't let you leave them." He felt that sentence down to the bone. Later that afternoon, by quiet agreement, Julian joined Ilara and the boys in the conference courtyard. He approached carefully, slow enough not to overwhelm, gentle enough not to intrude. Avery noticed him first. "Hey, fancy guy. Look, I made a rocket ship." Julian crouched beside him. "It's incredible." "How did you build it?" Avery puffed proudly. "Glue and imagination." Julian laughed. A soft, surprised sound Ilara hadn't heard from him in years. Rowan approached next, holding a children's book. "Can you read this?" "Mummy already read it twice." Julian glanced at Ilara for permission. She gave a subtle nod. He sat on a bench, and Rowan climbed beside him. Julian read with a calm, deep voice. Rowan leaned against his shoulder naturally, as though the connection was instinctive. Finley drifted toward Julian last. He held up a sheet of paper with carefully drawn circles. "Do you like patterns?" Julian studied it. "Very much." "Do you?" Finley nodded. "Patterns make sense." Julian smiled softly, recognizing his own younger self in that simple statement. "They do." Finley sat at Julian's feet and continued drawing. Ilara stood nearby, watching with folded arms, not out of defensiveness, but out of wonder. She had expected awkwardness, hesitation, tension. Instead, she saw ease. She saw comfort. She saw recognition that transcended biology. Julian wasn't trying too hard. He wasn't performing for her. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was simply present. And the boys, her boys, were responding to him in ways she couldn't deny. Rowan's trust, Avery's enthusiasm, Finley's quiet connection. All of it settled into a truth she wasn't ready to hold, but she couldn't ignore either. Ilara stepped back, observing the 4 of them together. The sight pulled at every emotional thread inside her, because it wasn't just sweet. It was right, natural, something she'd never let herself imagine. But fear tugged at her ribs. Julian had broken her before, not by yelling, not by abandonment, but by doubting the very essence of who she was. Could she trust him now? Could she trust that this time he wouldn't run? Could she trust that this time he would show up consistently? Could she trust that his heart had changed, and not just his circumstances? Julian looked up at her between reading lines to Rowan, silently asking permission to continue. She nodded. He smiled faintly. There was something different in his eyes now. Not entitlement, not fear, not hesitation, something humbler, something steadier, something she had never seen in him before, responsibility. But trust wasn't something she could hand over easily. Not after raising 3 children alone, not after being accused at her lowest moment, not after having her heart cracked open by the one man she let see beyond her walls. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. Her sons deserved a father. But did that father deserve them? She didn't know, not yet. When the boys ran off to examine a fountain, Julian stood slowly and approached Ilara. He kept a respectful distance. "Ilara," he said softly. She turned to face him. He took a breath, not the confident inhale of a CEO, but the vulnerable breath of a man about to ask for something sacred. "I want a chance," he said. She didn't speak. He continued, voice steady. "Not a guarantee, not forgiveness, not a shortcut. A chance." Her eyes narrowed, searching his expression. He went on, "I am not asking to fix what I broke between us. I don't expect that. I don't deserve that." Her throat tightened. "I'm asking for the opportunity to earn a place in their lives," he said, nodding slightly toward the boys. "To show up, to learn, to be someone they can rely on." Emotion flickered across his face, raw, unmasked. "I won't walk away again," he added quietly. "Not from them, not from the truth, not from responsibility." Ilara swallowed hard. "Julian." He shook his head gently. "I'm not asking for your answer now. Take your time. Watch me. See if my actions match my words." His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "I don't want redemption. I want them." The boys ran back toward them, laughing. Avery grabbed Julian's hand. "Come play." Julian smiled, then looked at Ilara once more, waiting. Her chest tightened. Her fears battled her hope. Her past warred with her present, and her heart, despite everything, felt something shift. She exhaled shakily. "We'll take it slow," she said. Julian nodded once, as though receiving something precious, and for the first time since she left his mansion years ago, they stepped into the same direction, not as lovers, not as enemies, not as strangers, as 2 people trying, carefully, cautiously, to build something truthful, for 3 little boys who already knew how to reach for both of them. The mornings used to be quiet, too quiet. Julian's penthouse was all cold steel, expensive silence, and glass walls that watched over a city he never connected with. But ever since Ilara allowed him to inch back into her world, things had begun to sound different. He no longer showed up with gift bags from luxury brands. Instead, he came with something unfamiliar, himself. On a Wednesday morning, Julian showed up at Ilara's apartment, holding nothing but a breakfast basket with 3 bagels, a small thermos of cocoa, and a folded newspaper. No assistants, no drivers, no polished monologue. Just him. "Morning," he said softly when Ilara opened the door in her robe, her sleepy eyes blinking at him. Ilara tilted her head. "Where's the usual parade?" "No more parades," he replied. "Just presents. Just me." He meant it. For weeks, Julian had been showing up consistently, not to sweep her off her feet with gestures, but to stand beside her while her feet remained grounded. He offered rides when she needed them, but never insisted. He picked up groceries without being asked. He walked Amari home from aftercare without cameras trailing them. At first, Ilara waited for the catch, but the catch never came. Julian's presence was no longer overwhelming. It was comforting, human, intentional. He sat on the carpet with the twins watching educational cartoons, letting Isaiah braid his hair into awkward clumps while Ariel quizzed him about sea creatures. He burned a grilled cheese sandwich and apologized like it was a national emergency. He didn't try to buy their affection. He tried to earn it. And that scared Ilara more than anything, because his consistency wasn't loud. It was steady, and steady things had the power to break walls slowly from the inside. The chaos of morning was a battle Julian had never trained for. His usual routine involved black coffee, a silent shower, and a ride in the back of a Mercedes. Now, he was dodging sticky fingers, tripping over pink socks, and trying not to cry over spilled almond milk. Ariel tugged at his shirt as he fumbled with pancake batter. "Uncle Jules, that's too much baking powder," she warned, her face squinting in a very Elara way. "Wait, really? What does it do?" "It makes it all puff up and taste funny." "Oh, well, you're my sous chef now." Ariel beamed. He flipped the pancake anyway, and watched it land like a burnt meteorite on the stove. The twins burst into laughter. Julian laughed too, even as flour dusted his once flawless designer shirt. "Good thing we're not opening a restaurant," he said, wiping his brow. Later, Julian struggled to button Isaiah's tiny shirt while the boy squirmed like a live fish. "Hold still, champ. Your teacher said your buttons don't need to be upside down. I don't like stiff shirts." Julian sighed and sat back. "Fine. Then we'll both go wrinkled." Team Wrinkle. At bedtime, the roles flipped. Julian didn't read stories with the same rhythm as Elara, but he read them with intention. He made the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood sound like a Wall Street trader. He mispronounced porridge and got booed. He tried again, and every time he turned the page, he looked up to see two faces, no longer guarded but expectant. He wasn't their hero, not yet, but he was showing up, not just as a visitor, but as someone learning how to belong. The preschool had never seen a man like Julian before. He arrived wearing a blue cardigan over a white t-shirt, jeans, yes, actual jeans, and sneakers that had clearly been worn before. He looked like a man who hadn't come to impress, but to engage. Elara had warned him, "These are 4-year-olds. They don't care about your stock options." "I'll try not to mention my net worth," he joked, but his nerves were real. Inside the class, the teacher handed him a worn copy of The Day the Crayons Quit. Julian looked down at the group of tiny humans staring up at him with blunt skepticism. He cleared his throat. "Hi, I'm Julian. I know some of you have met me as Ariel and Isaiah's, person. Today, I'm reading a story about crayons, and I promise I won't be boring." The first page was shaky. His voice cracked on peach crayon, and one child loudly asked, "Why your hair so shiny?" Julian laughed. "It's a work hazard." By the second page, he found a rhythm. He did voices. He paused for questions. He asked what they would do if their crayons quit. One boy whispered, "I'd cry into my coloring book." Julian nodded solemnly. Valid response. By the time he finished, the class clapped. Not a standing ovation. Just soft, genuine claps. The kind that said, "You didn't mess this up." When he walked out, Elara was waiting by the door. She had watched from the window. "Did I embarrass them?" "No," she said with a warm expression. "You showed up. That's more than most ever do." Julian looked down at his name tag, crayon drawn and crooked. He wore it with pride. Elara had seen performance before. She'd seen men act right just long enough to get what they wanted. She'd seen fake vulnerability. She'd seen crocodile tears and calculated affection. But this wasn't that. It was Julian sitting on the floor for hours, helping Isaiah glue feathers on a paper turkey. It was him taking 3 buses across the city after his car battery died, just to make it to Ariel's parent-teacher day. It was how he started setting his alarm to 5:30 a.m., not because Elara asked him to, but because he wanted to catch the kids before school. He didn't just love them. He was becoming part of their rhythm. Elara watched from the hallway one night as Julian tucked Ariel in. She was fussy, overtired, and insistent on a very specific pink blanket. Julian found it. He even smelled it to make sure it was the right pink. When he turned off the light, he didn't know Elara was watching. But she saw his face in the soft lamp glow, tired, messy, real. He didn't turn it on when he thought no one was looking. He had become that man now. And as Elara stood there, arms folded over her chest, she realized the ache in her chest wasn't fear anymore. It was hope, real, cautious, fragile, but it was hope nonetheless. The night was quiet, save for the hum of the heater and the soft clink of tea mugs against the kitchen counter. Julian sat across from Ilara, his hands curled around a ceramic mug she made at one of those community pottery classes. She looked beautiful, no makeup, hair tied back, her oversized sweater swallowing her frame. And for once, he didn't feel the need to charm her. Just be honest. "I've been thinking about something," he said, voice low. Ilara glanced up, her gaze cautious. "You've said it a few times, that you saved me, and I used to brush it off. But I get it now." Julian's eyes didn't waver. "You didn't just save me from losing my children. You saved me from becoming the kind of man who only knows how to win deals but loses everything that really matters." She said nothing. "I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I was worth saving," he continued. "Not with money, not with speeches, but with time, with truth, with presence." Her eyes glistened. He reached for her hand slowly, not rushing the moment. "I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight," he whispered. "Just a chance to show you what love from me looks like, now that I finally understand what it means." Silence. Then, Ilara nodded once, softly. "Then start here," she whispered, placing his hand on her chest. "Start where it hurts." He did, and in that quiet, ordinary kitchen, where no grand declarations echoed and no cameras watched, a broken man and a guarded woman began something more powerful than redemption. They began again. 1 year had passed since Julian stepped into fatherhood with both hands open and a heart ready for whatever truth came next. That year reshaped him. It reshaped all of them. Their life was no longer divided between her world and his. Instead, they met in the middle, choosing a home in a peaceful neighborhood outside San Jose, far from corporate noise. Their house wasn't enormous or cold like the Vance estate. It was warm, simple, and lived in. Toys on the rug, crayon art taped on the fridge, coffee mugs left too close to the edge of the counter because the boys liked to help. Ilara still woke early each morning, but not alone now. Julian was often beside her, hair tousled, voice low, mumbling about needing 5 more minutes even though the sun was already peeking through the blinds. She'd laugh, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "You're the CEO. Tell the sun to wait." He'd wrap an arm around her waist and pull her back into the pillow. "You know I would." Their mornings flowed with small, real moments. Julian tying mismatched shoelaces because the boys preferred funky-style days. Ilara packing fruit cups and healthy snacks while singing softly under her breath. Julian carrying all 3 backpacks even though the boys insisted they were strong enough. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't curated for cameras. It was life. Balanced, honoring, steady, and for the first time in Julian's life, he felt like he wasn't performing. He was living. Julian could have easily turned their story into headlines. The media would have eaten it up. Tech CEO discovers hidden children. Former maid becomes mother of his legacy. But he didn't allow it. He went private, fully, intentionally. He asked his board for reduced public appearances. He let his COO handle more conferences. He stopped letting photographers capture his personal world. And most importantly, he protected Ilara and the boys with a seriousness that impressed everyone who once thought Julian Vance only cared about prestige. Their neighbors didn't see a millionaire. They saw a man jogging behind 3 energetic kids on scooters. They saw a woman laughing on the porch while sipping iced tea. They saw a family building something grounded. Something theirs. The boys' school staff didn't treat Julian like a celebrity. They treated him like a dedicated parent who sometimes forgot to sign field trip forms on time. He appreciated that more than he ever admitted. When people recognized him in public, he kept his interactions short, polite, and distant. He would hold Ariel's hand tighter, put Isaiah on his hip, and keep moving. Ilara understood this new version of Julian. He no longer needed the world to look at him. He needed his sons to look up to him. This simple, real life felt like a blanket around them. Soft, protective, sacred. Julian often caught himself watching the boys chase each other around. The living room, wooden blocks crashing as they built imaginary cities. No camera could capture moments like that with honesty. No public statement could describe the growing peace inside him. He didn't need applause for the man he now was. He simply needed home. It started with a conversation on a quiet Sunday afternoon. One of those days, when the boys were painting on cardboard boxes, turning them into spaceships. Ilara sat beside Julian on the couch as he typed on his laptop. "What are you working on?" she asked. He hesitated before speaking. "Something I should have done a long time ago." She shifted toward him. "Tell me." Julian turned the screen so she could see the draft. The Ilara Initiative, tech access for underserved communities. At first, she thought it was a joke. "My name?" she said softly. Julian nodded. "You showed me what real service looks like, not from position or privilege, but from character. I want your legacy woven into something that changes lives." She stared at the title for a long moment, breath caught in her throat. "Julian, this is too much." "No," he corrected gently. "This is what your heart deserves to touch. If you hadn't stepped into my life the night I was hurt, I'm not sure who I'd be today." He looked at her more seriously now. "This isn't about my reputation. This is about the world seeing what I learned from you." The initiative launched quietly, without press, without a red carpet. Schools in low-income neighborhoods received grants for computer labs. Kids got access to coding workshops and mentors. Adults received free training sessions. And on the bottom of every brochure, in bold, simple letters, named in honor of Ilara Hale, whose compassion changed the trajectory of one family. And now, many more. She cried the first time she read it, not because of the recognition, but because Julian finally understood something she had always believed. Love isn't loud. Love builds in silence. Under the safety of a consistent home, the boys blossomed. Ariel developed a love for drawing maps of imaginary cities. Isaiah became the household's self-appointed problem solver, fixing toy cars with precision that made Julian laugh. And little Nolan, once shy, found confidence in storytelling, often grabbing a book and reading his own version aloud. They laughed more, worried less, grew fast. Julian kept every school craft, every scribbled note, every macaroni necklace. Displaying them on a corkboard, he installed himself in the hallway. It was imperfect and crowded, but it was his favorite corner of the house. Meanwhile, Ilara took a bigger role in the foundation. At events, she spoke with quiet authority, her confidence growing. Each time she saw families benefit from programs she helped shape. Julian watched her with admiration, often from the side of the room, knowing she was standing in a destiny she wasn't granted. She earned it. The boys loved visiting the community centers the foundation sponsored. They'd run inside like they owned the place, tugging on volunteers' sleeves and asking to help hand out tablets. They're natural leaders, people told Julian. He'd smile, eyes soft. They get that from their mother. And every time he said it, Ilara would feel something warm bloom in her chest. Their life wasn't perfect. Mornings got chaotic, work got stressful. The boys occasionally turned the living room into a soccer field, but it was theirs, unbreakable because it was built on truth, forgiveness, and quiet, persistent love. The table was filled with the kind of dinner that brought everyone together. Roasted chicken, sweet. Potatoes, a bowl of fruit, and 3 cups of chocolate milk that were already half drunk. The boys talked over each other, their excitement spilling onto the table. "Daddy, I scored a goal today." "Mummy, I helped Josie open her juice box." "I finished my puzzle first." Julian chuckled, rubbing his forehead. "Slow down, you 3. I only have 1 pair of ears." Ilara leaned back in her chair, watching the scene unfold with quiet gratitude. The once lonely man beside her was now a father who counted bedtime kisses as the best part of his day. As the laughter settled, Ilara reached for Julian's hand. "Will you lead the prayer tonight?" she asked. He swallowed, touched by the trust in her request. A year ago, he had no idea how to pray. Now, he prayed with steady humility. They all bowed their heads. "Thank you," Julian began softly, "for this home, for these boys, for strength, and for second chances. Thank you for the love that rebuilt what fear once broke." The boys ended with a joyful amen. They continued eating, laughing, sharing bites off their plates. Nolan smeared mashed potatoes on his cheek, and Isaiah tried to clean it with a napkin before giving up and kissing his brother instead. Julian took Ilara's hand beneath the table, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "You know," he whispered, "I thought you were the one who needed saving." She looked up, her smile soft, peaceful, whole. "I didn't need saving, Julian." He kissed the back of her hand, holding it to his heart. "You were the reason I believed love was still possible." And for the first time in years, Ilara felt her past fall completely behind her. Quietly, gently, leaving only the family she had always dreamed of building. A family built by choice, by forgiveness, by love. A family that love built. Like, comment and subscribe if you believe in second chances and real love. Join the Mr. Victor Storytime family.